So, continuing the introductions, I'm going to read this one. So, as discussed, Pennsylvania's House Majority Leader Matt Bradford is here for a presentation and a Q&A session for the second half of our lunch break. So Matt has been serving for the last nearly 2 decades, serving families in Montgomery County. He was first elected to serve as a state representative for the 70th Legislative District in 2009, and then from 2019 to 2023, he served as the Democratic chairman of the House Appropriations Committee, which I think is very important for us tax folks here. He was then chosen by his colleagues to lead the House Democratic Caucus when they took over the majority in 2023. As the House Majority Leader, Matt led his colleagues in putting forth an agenda that invests in public education, reducing the financial burden on taxpayers, strengthening the economy while protecting the workforce, providing tax cuts for working families, and as we just talked about, ensuring that all Pennsylvanians are treated equally. We just talked about fairness, so we'll continue that. But most importantly, Matt earned both his undergraduate and law degrees from this lauded institution, Villanova University, and is a lifelong resident of Southeast Pennsylvania. And it doesn't say this, but your daughter is at Villanova.
Yes.
So, Majority Leader Bradford, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. You want me to just grab it?
Yeah, I'll be here just run the mics
for
if there's
questions. All right, so it's still to talk at you for 10 minutes and then questions. Does that kind of work for everybody? All right, well, thank you for being here. I got to say, I'm not just an undergraduate student at Villanova, graduate. I then went to the law school, but it's much deeper than that. When I was 10 years old, on the day we won our first national championship, I decided I was going to Villanova. It gets deeper. Then I only applied to one school, Villanova University. I was always coming here. My parents thought it was the best school in the world. I never told them there was a school named Penn about 10 miles down the road. They never knew about it. And I met my wife on West Campus, which used to be a softball field, I believe, we got engaged in the grotto, married in the chapel. We are season ticket holders. We have 3 national championships and a pope. And now I would point out on the flip side, I did not love law school, so it's good to be here. But I was joking, and it's only half a joke. I wasn't even here the day they took the picture, so my picture is not on the graduates. But having said that, it's a school that means the world to me and my family. We're the most hardcore Villanova fans in the world. It is a great institution. And I immediately want a refund because I went to when the law school was what looks like a Catholic middle school next door. And they ripped me off, and I helped fund this with the overpayment that I made for the capital that clearly didn't go into my degree. But it's great to be here. It's one of my favorite places in the world. And I must say, I'm probably not the best speaker that you would get today. I did not like law school, as I admitted, but tax is a little bit of a dry subject and not one that I particularly can say I have an expertise in, but I see my former colleague, Brian Barbin, who I served with, who knew this stuff cold, and I was like, thank God there's a few accountants in this institution that understand it, and just glad that you're here and good to see you. So let me just tell you a little bit about myself and kind of my view of how we wound up here, and then hopefully it'll set the stage for some questions from there. So I mentioned I went to Villanova, but I actually grew up in Chester County, wound up in Montgomery County after coming to Villanova, realizing how expensive it was to live around here, realized it was better off to live in central Montgomery County just for affordability reasons, but set up our family there, have 4 kids there, and from there, it's kind of a blur. I think I've now been in the legislature 16 years. I got elected with Brian, so I can't even do the math well enough at this point. But got elected 16 years ago at the height of the Great Recession, served 10 years I think it was more than 10, maybe 12 years in the wilderness that was a deep minority, and the last few years have gotten to serve with my friend from Montgomery County, our governor, Josh Shapiro, and it's been a tremendous honor to serve with him and to work with him and deal with issues that I think actually are relevant to the work that you guys do as practitioners of the law. And also deal with some of the challenges of our Commonwealth. I notice our friends from the chamber here, and they've probably heard me give this conversation as a good progressive Democrat. I don't know if they always agree with my worldview on it, But one of the things that we have so great, and being from Montgomery County and being from southeastern Pennsylvania and seeing what really makes our economy strong here in southeastern Pennsylvania, but really looking at the larger prism, having had the opportunity since my colleagues had the, I would say, wisdom, but also the humor to elect me the leader of a one-seat majority 3 years ago now, how to govern through that, but also trying to make the argument that we need to do pro-growth policies. And I say this, again, as a progressive Democrat who'd be the first one to say that we need to increase the minimum wage. $7.25 is entirely too low. It's absurd. Anyone who's tried to live, whether you're in Montgomery County or frankly any county in this Commonwealth or country, it's impossible to live on. So advocating on those issues, but I'm also the same guy who will say, and I think we've had a real partner in this with Governor Shapiro, is saying, we also need to talk about competitiveness. And one of the things that we've been able to do in the last few years, even with, frankly, a Democratic governor and a Democratic House and a Senate that is, as long as I've been alive, pretty much Republican-controlled, and dealing with divided government. I know I'm happy to take some questions about what that might look like and some of the challenges because of things like SEPTA and some of the things that you're hearing in the papers. But one of the things we must do, and I think we do this better in southeastern Pennsylvania than we do in other parts of the state. And I think we have a real story to tell and a narrative that we need to write, but we need to talk broader in our Commonwealth. We're a Commonwealth that has real challenges. And sometimes you'll hear and you read in the paper, they'll talk about, Pennsylvania continues to have a structural deficit. It does. I'm the first one to concede that point. We are, in many ways, too old, too sick, too poor. We don't have enough growth and competitiveness. And I believe, and the governor and I joke about this, when he says, you start to sound like Paul Ryan when you talk like this, is we need to lower taxes in Pennsylvania. And we've had some real success. Frankly, when we had Republican trifectas in Pennsylvania, we had the highest C&I in the country. We had almost a 10% C&I rate here in Pennsylvania, corporate net income tax. That is a giant stop sign for business and investment in this Commonwealth. And we've put ourselves on a path to dramatically cut the corporate net income rate. For those of us in the Southeast where, from my part of Montgomery County, I live kind of between like Bluebell and Skippack, for those of you that are local, most of my constituents either work at GSK, Merck, Pfizer, Wyeth. These are high growth, high wage jobs that you can build a community around that is strong, that is viable, that can afford the type of great schools and great quality of life and the infrastructure that supports that. We've built that kind of tax base here in southeastern Pennsylvania. But that's why we did NOL reform, to give those corporations the ability to grow and succeed and prosper. And frankly, that's why people want to come to our part of the Commonwealth. We are strong economically. We are strong. We have population growth. But there's another story. And again, it's not about two Pennsylvanias. We're all in this together. And I don't want to sound like that, though I'm a totally parochial Southeasterner who loves the Phillies, Flyers, Sixers, Eagles, and the Villanova Wildcats. But there are parts of our Commonwealth, and not too far away in Cambria County, where we are hemorrhaging population. In the last decade, we just went through a pretty big reapportionment redistricting process where the demographics of the Commonwealth. And every year in Pennsylvania, it's pretty much, you can set your clock by it, Pennsylvania loses another congressional seat because compared to the Sun Belt states, compared to the high growth states, and not just blue and red states, there are many blue states that are adding population too, but Pennsylvania, we're an older state, and we have continued to lose population, and and that results in the challenges around our structural deficit issues. Our structural deficit is inextricably linked to a demographics where counties like Westmoreland County, next to Cambria County, lost 10% of its population over the last decade. That is unsustainable with the legacy costs and the capital costs and the deferred maintenance, the roads, the bridges, the infrastructure, the fact that you're still paying pensions and wages based on people that no longer live in those communities where, frankly, those pension checks are going out of state in many cases. Here in southeastern Pennsylvania, we have a very different story and a very different reality. And we need to harness that for good. And I think it's also something that we can show not just to other parts of our Commonwealth, but to other parts of the country. And I say that, I mentioned Governor Shapiro. But I think one of the reasons why he's talked as a national leader, not just as our party, but as of the state and the country, is because here in Pennsylvania we have a very different story to tell. Despite divided government, which I jokingly say, this is again me getting off point, but in Washington, D.C., they had an 8-seat lead. At that time, it was Kevin McCarthy before Mike Johnson. He had an 8-seat majority in the U.S. House of Representatives. And not only did they not get anything done with an 8-seat majority, they kicked out the speaker, they had a coup, they fought like hell, and they had a government shutdown. In Pennsylvania, despite divided government, and despite only having a 1-seat majority in the House, which I would point out for those who don't do the math, that is 1/8 as large as the size of what was going on in D.C., we were able to govern pragmatically. And I'll kind of wrap up to say kind of where I started. I said, listen, I'm a good progressive Democrat. I'm for all the social equality issues that you would expect from a Democrat. I'm for increasing the minimum wage. But we are pragmatic as hell. And we recognize in the purplest of purple states here in Pennsylvania that we have an obligation to govern wisely. And again, my good friend and former colleague who sat in front of me on the floor would tell you, listen, I'm very proud of my good progressive bona fides, but I will tell you, in this day and age where our politics have become too tribal, too poisonous, too painful, we have real leadership at the federal, at the governor level, and I think we've tried to follow that lead in the legislature, to be pragmatic, to be thoughtful, to make smart investments, to make sure that, frankly, we have a demographic that's growing, that's younger, that when kids come to Villanova, or if they choose Penn by accident, that they realize that there's a future, that there are the 6-figure jobs that you need to be able to afford to live in southeastern Pennsylvania, but the opportunity is to move up the economic pay scale, and that those opportunities exist here in southeastern Pennsylvania and in Pennsylvania as a whole. And we need to grow this economy. So a lot of the issues of state and local tax, which I know is the issue in front of you guys today and every day, is we need to find out how we can make ourselves more competitive. And I always joke, it's kind of easy because we got New Jersey next to us. So we have a great, I do, see, we got to look at the bright side. So when it comes to good governments, the bar is very low. No, but sincerely, we need to get the type of big companies, big employers that not only are your sponsors, but in many cases your employers are the companies that you guys created and make vibrant and strong. That we no longer can have this false choice that it's either progressive ideals or business growth. We've got to figure it out. And right here in southeastern Pennsylvania, right around Villanova University, right around the work that you do every day, I think we've shown that way. And yes, we have work to do. And yes, we've got to perfect it. And yes, it's hard because we do have divided government and we do have all the craziness that we're going to have to deal with. And I'm happy to take questions about what it's going to look like as the cuts from Washington, D.C. obviously trickle down. And it's not just even the cuts, it's the chaos, the tariffing, the tax policy that's so up in the air. And obviously, what's going to happen with the type of deficit spending that you're going to see that's going to result in interest rate fluctuations and all that. Those are real questions and there are real concerns, and we need to be thoughtful and wise about how we deal with that. But we need to build bridges not only to the business community, but to the practitioners like yourselves who do the hard work and actually have to deal with the implementation of the fact that the legislature doesn't always give you the best legislation to work with. We respect that we're not perfect, but I'm happy to be here today, happy to be here with our friends from PICFA and the SALT folks. So just thank you all for having me. And with that, I'll turn it over for any questions.
I don't have to go too far.
This is an easy one. Matt, I'm going to be leading a panel talking about legislature and how they get involved with apportionment principles. It would be really great to hear from you about the technicalities of state tax. Number one, who in the legislature actually understands this stuff, and how do you get your colleagues to understand it too?
Almost no one. All right.
That's true, right?
That is 100% true. So so one of the big things that we're continuing to work on, and PICFA and Pete Calcara, who I know would have otherwise been here, is we obviously rely on the Department of Revenue, and you know, we actually have right now Pat Brown, who used to be a Republican state senator from Lehigh Valley, who was a practitioner, is very thoughtful. Pat was always a reliable source of information. Pat was on the other side of the aisle in the other chamber, but he was someone we always relied on. He's someone, again, I think, kind of proving the point that the governor can be pretty thoughtful about this. He actually tapped Pat Brown to be our Secretary of Revenue, so he's someone who's thoughtful. One of the issues that we made real progress when we did the C&I reduction, and we're actually trying to accelerate that C&I reduction, is kind of add backs, and you know, doing basically we modeled it more or less, and Pat Brown and I actually had some conversations about. Pat understood it. I just shook my head like I knew what I was talking about. But obviously we have staff, and we're blessed to have that. But we also have the advocates and the agencies that are helpful. We made progress on that, frankly, because there was a willingness to give and take in our politics, and recognize that there are thoughtful people. One of the issues right now, and I know you're going to have the Chamber of Commerce come and talk about, and you'll hear the other side, is a lot of us want to accelerate the cut in the C&I that we're already making. I mentioned the C&I when we first came into the majority. It was nearly 10%. We're on a path to cut it in half. With the leadership of the governor, we want to cut it further and faster. But one of the things we want to do is deal with combined reporting, the quote-unquote Delaware loophole. And I know typically the practitioners will say it creates a little bit of paperwork, but there's some points to doing it. I think 30 states, give or take, now have done that. You know, people understand the Delaware loophole because they go, oh, those guys are quote-unquote cheating. But getting people to understand, hey, look, you know, what does it mean when you're putting, you know, you're exporting these, what do they call them? So you guys even know the words for it. I'm trying to think, the trademarks and stuff. You're going to send them to the other state. It's hard for people to get their head around it. That's why it's so important, frankly, for elected officials to have relationships with trusted third-party validators who can go to their own tax professionals, folks like the associations who speak not through a blue and red lens, but like, hey, here's the upside of combined reporting, here's the potential downside. I'm someone who supports it. I've listened to the practitioner. I've had, you know, the associations come in on several occasions to specifically say, what are your thoughts? And what's the good side and bad? We do have a few accountants in the House. I'm trying to think. I think there's a gentleman from Lancaster. Griner Sanchez is a lawyer and accountant. He's a really boring guy. Nick Piscatano is actually one of my best friends in the legislature. He's a great guy. He's a new state senator from the western part of the state, very capable and very thoughtful and not particularly ideological.
I guess I'll take the segue, but I think the gentleman over there might have a question after that, Drew, or if he wants to go ahead.
Well, you were helpful, so you should get to go next.
Fair enough. I'll give him the mic next. So let me just say this. I was with everybody you just named yesterday, Pete and Pat and the rest of the crew in Harrisburg doing some things. I mean, any advice in terms of when we want to get laws passed that may make common sense, or even policies, partnering with the Department of Revenue? Any advice? You know, you kind of mentioned the governor. You mentioned it's a purple state. How do we get things done and get it done quick?
Don't go to government. So I would argue, listen, quick is relative in government. Again, and this is not a commercial for Josh Shapiro. What we have now is a governor who truly, you know, he'll talk about the GSD stuff, right? Get shit done thing, and that's part of the shtick. But I'll also say this. There's a recognition that there should no longer be a constituency for doing nothing. That the status quo in Pennsylvania is not a growth solution. It's not competitive, and it is killing us long term. You know, I kind of laugh when I hear my Republican friends talk about the structural deficit, and I'm like, guys, we're trying to cut taxes. We're trying to be more efficient on not just practitioner issues, but permitting issues. Like ideas like, hey, let's stop having the same decades-old stale fights. Like our minimum wage is $7.25. I'm pretty sure we can cut a deal on that. I'm pretty sure there are things we can get moving on. And sometimes I feel like there's an intransigence. You know, we talk about it in the business community, in the bureaucracy a lot, but sometimes I hear it in the business community where they don't seem to understand there are people out there. You have a governor right now who's very dynamic, is very much leaning into it, probably the first time since we had Ed Rendell as governor, who truly wants to get shit done and wants to stop having the same fights. The relationships you have, the gentleman you named, I think there are people who kind of have bought into that ethos that we need to make stuff happen, and the Commonwealth can no longer be happy to be, hey, we're still beating, Alabama and Mississippi. It's not a winning solution to our long-term challenges. Yeah. And the other thing I would add, and this is like hyper political, and I don't want to sound like this, I think as our politics have changed, and I look at Brian as I say this, areas like this used to be the red areas of the state. And a lot of the Chamber of Commerce Republicans more and more find themselves in very blue areas. The walls that typically existed on these type of conversations, they need to come down. I jokingly say, and again, this is not an indictment of the current president, he's had enough of those, is very quickly is like, the Republican Party used to be the free trade party. The Republican Party used to be the balanced budget party. You could also go down the family values and all the other stuff. But even on those dollar and cents issues, there's like a change happening in our politics, whether it's geographical or ideological or because there's so much populism, frankly, that's infused in politics at the federal level right now. There is no reason for Democrats anymore to fear going into rooms with business people, practitioners, and not have these kind of discussions. Because frankly, we're talking about the SEPTA crisis in southeastern Pennsylvania around transit. As much as I hear it from the poor guy who's still making those poverty minimum wages that we have in some of our service sector jobs, I hear it more from Comcast. When I talk about the cost of childcare, I'm more likely to hear it from Grant Thornton partners who are like, my associates can't get childcare. Some of my best workers are working moms. I need them to be able to afford the very childcare that they need to work. So a lot of issues that used to be viewed through the spectrum of, they're welfare issues, they're democratic issues, they're poor people issues. I think people are starting to recognize that,
Push you in the camera. How's this work?
I apologize. All right.
I'm the one who's shot.
All right. So stay between this. It's like the goalposts.
It is.
All right. I think people are starting to recognize that these aren't Democrat-Republican issues. These are growth issues. These are competitive issues. And I think we need to do a better job in that regard.
Yes, you were addressing some of the problems, but now that I'm officially old, I can talk about what Philadelphia and Pittsburgh used to be like when, right after World War II, we still had the 5 shipyards along the Delaware, when we still had national banks, department stores that had their headquarters in Philadelphia, when Pittsburgh was a big corporate center, and Northeast Pennsylvania had the steel plants and all that, and people were very active. On a federal level, Pennsylvania actually subsidized moving industry to the south and the southwest, and there was nothing that the state could really do about it. Those decisions are outside the state legislature's compound. But raising the state minimum wage would generate more business activity because the people at the lower end, everything they earn, they're going to spend. And they're going to pay taxes, sales tax, et cetera. And having that additional income to the state may mean that you don't have to look to raise taxes. It's like Robert Reich, who was served under Clinton, pointed out that from the 1980s until today, the bottom 40% in real terms haven't had an increase in wages. Yep. If they had an increase in wages, the amount they would have paid in Social Security would mean that Social Security would not be going bankrupt. Yep. We wouldn't have to worry about Social Security. So there's a lot of things that are structural. Some of it is outside the scope of the state legislature. But by the same token, the state legislature passed that Act 12, which allowed privatization of water supplies. And now in Montgomery County, it's tripled or quadrupled. Whereas if the Commonwealth had loaned the money to take care of the repairs, they would have had a sinking fund to pay it back because everybody's going to use water and they're going to be paying their bill monthly.
Yep.
So instead of turning it over into private hand, and look what happened in Delaware County where all the hospitals closed because of private equity, which came in and pulled out $500 million collapsing the hospitals, no emergency services for some time now. We're trying to get it up and running.
And that's before the Medicaid cuts that are coming.
Right.
So Matt, I suspect there's a long answer to this and a 4-minute answer to this. I also know you've got a time constraint, and we're going to move on. So I appreciate that.
So one of the points I would make is, obviously we're a consumer economy more and more, right? So, on the minimum wage issue, for a lot of us, it's a no-brainer. If someone's making $7.25 an hour, if you, God forbid, we convince the Senate to double it or more than double it and get to a $15 minimum wage, every dollar that will reverberate through our economy just through consumption. So, it's a no-brainer. I would argue, this is where I probably sound much more progressive and proudly so. It turns out a billionaire, that marginal extra billion, 10 billion, 20 billion, you've got these folks who are accumulating tremendous wealth. That doesn't create a lot of wealth. It creates a lot of private equity funds and the type of people who invest in a lot of things that have created all kinds of bad outcomes in our community. So I can make those arguments. Listen, I'm not against accumulating wealth. In fact, I'm all about it. God knows everything around the main line here is a pretty good view of what that can look like. But one would argue we shouldn't have the people cleaning those houses making minimum wage or $10 an hour. And frankly, I would argue people who are making those wages are now getting government subsidies in terms of LIHEAP and food stamps and some of the very programs that we're now going to cut at the federal level. It is a weird time in terms of our politics. So I know you're making more of a point than a question. I would just touch on it to kind of answer it that way.
Well, so one, I want to thank you for your time, but also I want to wish you the best of luck because it is June 5th. And the Constitution or something says, budget by the end of June. I know that's not
advisory.
But you're headed off to do things, and possibly with a tax bill. I know we didn't talk about current legislation, probably deliberately, but I assume there'll be news to come, and appreciate your leadership and you working through the General Assembly as it is currently elected, and mostly just appreciate you coming and sharing time and feedback.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate all of you and all the work you do. So thank you all so much.